Hi, welcome to the Money Compass.
The show that will guide you through the world of money and finance.
With me, Emma Knights.
And me, Lukas Spiro.
Exploring investments, retirement, taxes and protection.
And helping you navigate your way to financial success. In today's episode, we will be looking back at the past 12 months and all of the events that have happened in an extremely busy year and what impact they've had on the world. So, Emma, where do we start?
Only one place to start, at the very beginning, so we'll go all the way back to January 2022, when the year started with its highest level of inflation since March 1992 at 5.4%. And I think it's safe to say we all know that it's only gone one way from there.
Yeah, you're right on that. We'll touch on that more as we go through, but that hasn't improved since January, so
not at all.
Not a great start.
So that was not the only poor start to the year. That there were lots of calls for Boris Johnson to resign as our Prime Minister, asking him to leave number 10 after all these supposed parties that he had during COVID when everybody else was staying at home.
And again, that was a theme throughout the year, wasn't there? A lot of political ins and outs and
definitely
twos and fros. And again, we'll touch on some more of that later. It didn't get any better. If anything, got unfortunately the sad events in February with Russia invading Ukraine, causing all sorts of panic and globally.
I thought it was just a military operation.
That was what the initially everyone thought, but I think that the wiser amongst us knew that it might escalate and carry on. And like I said, that's been a big theme throughout the year and caused huge impact on the markets as a whole, economically, politically, and obviously very sad what's going on for the people in Ukraine.
Most definitely. So come March, the Bank of England started to try and combat that inflation. So they started to increase interest rates further from the raises they'd done in 2021. So rates increased from 0.5 to 0.75. I think there was something quite significant that happened in your world though, Lucas, wasn't there?
Oh yes, that meant that Chelsea's owner also got sanctioned, being Russian. So that had a big impact on the world of football, and the knock-on effect of that is that not just only the Chelsea's owner, but a lot of the Russian billionaires and businesses and any companies really affiliated with Russia were getting sanctioned and bank accounts being frozen. So obviously that, again, caused huge impact on the world.
Definitely. But some slightly better news for homeowners, that Nationwide reported that house prices had increased by 14.7%. So it was the highest annual increase since 2004, with a typical UK home now costing just over £265,000. So some really good news for existing homeowners. Obviously, the equity in their home had gone up, but obviously not as good news for first-time buyers, maybe, that
for those
trying to get on the property ladder.
Yeah, exactly that, trying to get on the ladder. And as we go through again with the rise in interest rates, that's not going to be helpful at all. But as well as the houses going up, the energy price cap in April then rose by 54%, up to just under £2,000. You had the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, was then warning that could be the biggest single shock from energy prices since the 70s, and obviously again caused a lot of panic with people of thinking, how are we going to afford these increases?
And I don't think it stopped there from April. It's kind of continued, hasn't it?
It's kept going up. Yeah. So sort of the early theme to the year is all the trends that started early in the year just carried on throughout the year, and increases kept coming. Another increase in April was the national insurance increase came into effect. There was an extra 1.25% contributions being paid by employees, businesses and the self-employed. However, that has since been reversed. One of the few things that was reversed in the autumn budget. So
moving on into May, there was some slightly better news. So unemployment fell to its lowest level since 1974. So there were finally more job vacancies than there were unemployed people in the UK for the first time since records ever began. So great news that there were less unemployed people, but as an employer, very difficult to find any new employees if you did need anybody. Yeah. So following on from what you were just talking about with the energy costs and everything going up, our Chancellor at the time, Rishi Sunak, announced a £15 billion package for measures to address the increase in energy costs. So part of that was a windfall tax on the oil and gas firms. Again, it hasn't necessarily helped to combat the increase in prices at this time.
No. I mean, there was the announcement as well that some of the poorest households were going to get some cost of living payments to help obviously ease that. So that was a little bit of, not necessarily positive news out of it, but at least there was some assistance.
Especially for those households on lower incomes.
Yeah, exactly.
We're really going to need that help.
Yeah. June, obviously, there was some some good stuff in June when the Queen became the first ever monarch to reach the milestone of 70 years and celebrated her platinum jubilee. There was a real good feel good factor around the country.
Good times. I had a good party for that one.
Lots of parties everywhere, wasn't there? Street parties, bunting. There was a real nice feeling around the country.
Definitely gets the patriotism out.
It was, yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the Queen celebrating, was it? In June, I think, was it your birthday as well, Emma?
It was indeed.
Yes.
16th of June was a very important day. Not only was it my birthday, but the Bank of England also decided to increase interest rates again. So they went up to 1.25%.
Yeah.
So happy birthday.
I think that actually at the time as well was the fifth successive increase, wasn't it? That's just to main reason for that, to try and restrain the inflation that had been ever increasing since really the war started in February. So we had to put a bit of a downer on June. We couldn't have too positive, but
that was June. What about July? There's quite a few things that happened in July, I do believe.
July, we then had both Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson resigning, prompting a leadership election, and again the starts of what we alluded to earlier, the political ins and outs and comings and goings at 10 Downing Street. One of the effects of that, it actually knocked the pound down to a 2-year low against the dollar. So anyone going to America at that time...
Came a very expensive holiday at that time. So there were a few people that I know of that were a little bit tearful of, oh no, this is now going to be a really expensive holiday.
And a lot of people don't think of those things, do they, at the time? And it can have, little small changes, what an impact it can have on, like you said, things like holiday and how much you can actually spend and what your money's worth abroad. The month ended with some more positive news, largely on the sporting front, when the women showed the men how to do it. The women football team, by winning the Euros, beating Germany in the final. And I think, again, just bringing a feel-good factor back to the country and everyone getting behind them. And not only the women performing well on the sporting front, we also performed excellently in the Commonwealth Games, coming second to Australia with an impressive 97 gold medals. So again, that was, a good sporting time of the year.
Most definitely. So, how we mentioned back in April that there'd been a price cap and it had increased to just under £2,000. Come August, Ofgem announced an 80% rise in the price cap for energy bills and households. So it increased from that £1,971 all the way up to £3,549, which is what made those payments to the lower income households so important, because prices are just continuing to go up and up and up and up.
Yeah.
So August seems like a relatively quiet month. When you then look at September was a very, very busy month.
No, yeah, you're right there. A lot happened in September. Obviously, we had the leadership election. Ultimately, whether it was the right decision doesn't seem to be, obviously, now that Liz Truss was elected, pipping the now Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, well, not pipping, but winning 57% of the final vote compared to Rishi Sunak and taking over at number 10. But that, unfortunately, wasn't the saddest news of September. Biggest story to come out of that was the death of Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away on the 8th of September. Our longest serving monarch, and just had her platinum jubilee. Again, I think it wasn't just the UK that stopped that day. I think the entire world come to a halt, and you really did feel that. So she was a fantastic monarch, and I'm sure everyone
until
will
the
agree.
very end,
yes,
didn't she?
Did. A few days before, she was, welcoming Liz Truss into number 10. So as you said, she was a great servant and worked right until the very end. Later in that month, really, I suppose, no other word apart from the car crash of the mini budget.
I think that's a very polite way of putting it.
Yeah,
I'm not
trying to
lie.
be a bit diplomatic here. Kwasi's mini budget, in which he announced some of the biggest tax cuts in the UK since 1972. Top rate, 45% income tax rate, was increased and only paid by the highest earners in England. Sorry, it was scrapped, not increased. Sorry, scrapped. While the basic rate in England was reduced to 19%. That caused huge implications in the financial markets and led to huge criticism of the UK's fiscal policy. So that wasn't,
No,
we all know how that, I think that was just compounded all of the other issues that were already going on, from the war, inflation, the rise in interest rates, the housing costs.
And I think it just brought more uncertainty as well, didn't it? That people were then thinking, what on earth is going on in an already kind of very uncertain time?
Yeah.
For all these different changes to be brought in that nobody was expecting, just didn't seem to sit very well,
No.
which is then not surprising that a few weeks later that Kwasi was dismissed, and we were then brought in with a new chancellor. So we now have Jeremy Hunt looking after us. So Kwasi was the second shortest serving chancellor in the UK. The only other that served for a shorter period than him was an Ian MacLeod, but he died of a heart attack in 1970. So I think it's a fair reason that he had a much shorter time serving, but it is what it is. Jeremy Hunt, our new chancellor, then delivered a new emergency statement, which basically unwound everything from the mini budget that he'd announced, and basically put everything back to where we were and said, no, we'll have our autumn budget in November. That's when all the major decisions that will be made.
Yeah, and I think from the fallout from that as well, then that just put huge pressure on Liz, didn't it? Liz Truss. I mean, she sort of threw Kwasi under the bus a little bit, but it just led to such pressure on her that she almost her position just become untenable, and then it wasn't too much longer.
So a whole 45 days at number 10, and she was moving on.
She then moved on, didn't she, at the end of the month as well, and led to Rishi coming in when, whatever your political leaning is, I think he's probably, at the moment, certainly the right or the best person for the job out of the candidates that were available. Maybe a bit of a shame that it took longer than it did, him to get there. And again, I think all of that uncertainty just made things a lot worse, sort of financially, economically, and didn't help at all.
Random fact that I don't know if you knew, Lucas, that he's actually the youngest leader that we've had in the UK in over 200 years.
Yes, so. and the first British Asian Prime Minister as well. So
bringing lots of firsts,
lots of firsts
with him as well.
Yeah. And then moving on into November, I think you just touched on it. That's the biggest thing really that to bring us up to date is we've just had our the autumn statement from Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, and there's lots of important points to come out of that.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Most notably, I think, well, not necessarily most notably, should we do them for the listeners? If we do them sort of in if we break them down into sections really, and we do a quick brief summary of what's happened in the autumn statement.
Most definitely. Kick us off, Lucas.
Yeah. So if we start, probably the one that a lot of people are particularly interested is income tax. The amount that you can earn now before you pay any additional income rate of taxes has reduced down from 150,000 to 125,000, £140, and it's important to point out that a lot of these changes won't actually take place until the new tax year, the 6th of April 2023. But at least you'll be aware of them well in advance of that. The personal allowance of £12,570 has remained unchanged. So that's the amount you can actually pay before you start paying any tax. Again, really important for those people on, pension, lower incomes or just being on.
Would have been nice if that one went up, but
yes,
it is
certainly.
What it is. We can't wish for these things.
No.
Things that have changed slightly though are dividends.
Yep.
So the dividend allowance is going to be reduced. So at the moment you can earn £2,000 in dividends before you pay any dividend tax. Come April 6th, 23, that's going to reduce to £1,000. And the following tax year, they've already announced that it's going to reduce to £500. So that is reducing quite a bit.
Yeah. What's happened to the actual dividend tax rates, Emma? Have they changed at all?
So they changed earlier this year. So when national insurance rates went up, dividend tax rates went up at the same time.
Yeah.
For basic rate dividend taxpayers is 8.5%, and higher rate is 33.75%, and additional rate it's 39.35%. When they reduced the national insurance, it was questioned whether that would go back down too, but they have remained where they are. So tax has increased and also your allowance has reduced in that area. So not particularly helpful for those that are high dividend earners.
And there was also, I believe, the capital gains tax allowance is also going to be reduced from 2023.
Yeah.
It's currently at 12,300, but it's going to come down, sort of under half to 6,000 from April, and then further cut in April 24 to 3,000. So again, as you said, tax allowances have gone down. So there may be a lot of planning to be done around that time. That's something we'll probably touch on in future episodes. But those allowances have changed, and that can have a big impact on particularly people, if you've got second homes, any
big
gains on investment portfolios.
Or...
Yeah, so that I'm sure we'll have a lot of clients in early part of the year and around April where we will need to have a careful look at their planning and make the most use of those allowances for them.
Most definitely. So another
and
one that's hit business owners is corporation tax. So this has been changed slightly, but not for all businesses. So at the moment, corporation tax is 19%, but it will increase to 25% as of the 1st of April 2023. However, any companies with profits below £50,000 are still going to continue to pay the rate of 19%. So again, it's still supporting the smaller businesses and not expecting them to pay such a high level of tax. And there's also going to be a reintroduction of tapering relief for businesses with profits between 50,000 and 250,000. So it doesn't mean that they're immediately going to go up to the rate of 25%. So again, it's helping on a sliding scale, which is what businesses need, especially with a looming recession that we're expecting to be announced anytime, basically.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, going back to what I touched on it earlier, the national insurance. So the increase in national insurance that was there to help pay for social care reforms, that has been scrapped now. Additional 1.25% that was added previously, that's been scrapped, and the current 2022-23 rates are going to remain in force. I think, like I said, I touched on that earlier. One other thing that's probably quite important as well, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners is what happened to pensions. There's been no mention of any extension to the lifetime allowance, so that's an allowance that's going to remain fixed until 2026. It's currently at £1,073,100, but the triple lock was quite a hot topic at the time, and everyone was wondering what's going to happen with that. That's the triple lock on the state pension. That's going to be maintained. And that's going to guarantee the 10.1% CPI based increase for next April, and that's along with the same increase to the pension credit. So there was a lot of discussion because of the high rates of inflation, whether that was actually going to, kick in.
Lots of happy pensioners with that increase.
Yeah.
But just a random piece of information, I actually spoke to a care home yesterday, and they've written to all of their residents, and they'll be increasing their care home fees by 10% next year. So that is going to be passed on immediately.
Yeah, it's going to straight away be passed on. So that's really sort of brings, in a nutshell, I mean, obviously there was lots of other things that happened throughout the year, but I think just really to bring it up to date and let you sort of know where we're exactly at in terms of time of recording. The latest in terms of away from the economy and all the doom and gloom of 2022, England have just qualified for the knockout stages of the World Cup. So that's we're trying to end it on a positive. If you're a fan of I'm a Celebrity, Jill Scott has just become the Queen of the Jungle. So that sort of brings it up to date.
Things.
Yeah, extremely important.
And also, the world population has actually reached 8 billion people.
Oh, wow.
That's a significant milestone.
That is a huge milestone.
And we'll see in years to come the impact that has with aging populations potentially, and all sorts of different things that could be an issue. But I think a nice way to round up today's episode is to kind of have a look at how all of these different things have actually affected the world and kind of the volatility, so the ups and downs in the markets. Lucas, take us away. And
Yeah, I mean, as we've sort of gone through it, the world hasn't looked particularly a bright place this year. But I mean, how do you sort of compare it to previous years? I mean, it hasn't been one to remember when, like you said, when it comes to volatility, market volatility, and the post-pandemic financial landscape. It does look very different to previous years. But how does it, stand in real terms? So market volatility, I mean, a good way to sort of, a simple way, I suppose, if you will, is to measure it is just looking or counting the number of days, or how we like to, is to count the number of days when a market or the market has moved up or down by more than 1%. I think that's quite a good way. Just a nice simple way. Simply. Yeah, really simply, just to look and see how much, if it's moved up by more than, more up or down by more than 1%.
And if it were to move by, say, 3% or more, that would be something quite extreme.
That's extreme volatility, yeah. If it's swinging up and down that much, I mean, if you look back during the COVID pandemic in 2020, there were about 10 days when the market actually moved more than 5%. So that just really reflected the chaos that was going on at the time. So if we compare it to, that was only a couple of years ago, 2022 hasn't actually been quite as dramatic, despite everything that's been going on. but we still have had movements that are a bit above average, above that 1%, if we took that as a marker.
Most definitely. So if we look back over a 12-month period, so from November 21 to November 22, there's 105 days so far where the market has moved by more than 1%.
Yeah, so that's double, isn't it, the average? You normally expect, in a normal year, around about, half of that, about 52 days, really.
So what it shows us is that 2022 is sixth in line to being the most volatile year. So it's beaten by a few years. So 2020 was one of those, 2009, 2008, 2002 and 1974. So I know there's still a little bit of time in 2022 for that to change. But it just shows you that although this year has felt very turbulent and very rocky, actually, when you compare it to previous years, that actually we're still okay. It's not quite as bad as it's been made out.
We've seen worse, and obviously and things do get better. It's it's easy to sit here and say, oh, don't worry, don't panic, and it's totally understandable if people are worried about cost of living and all of those types of things. But it's people, if you can just hang on in there, things do tend to get better. So it's just, trying to remain positive and hang on in there, really. But what do you think that means going forward, Emma, for 2023? What can we expect to happen going forward?
Very tricky question. I'd love to pull out my crystal ball right now and be able to give you the exact answer to that. But as I said before, there's a looming recession in the UK. The war continues in Ukraine, and all of those things continue to affect the market volatility. So I think 2023 going forwards, again, could still be a bit rocky. It could still be turbulent, but I can see light at the end of the tunnel and things starting to improve. So my personal opinion is we're starting to move forwards and things can go up.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, obviously everyone is individual and we sort of can't comment on individual circumstances, but I think the big takeaway is that, we've certainly had more volatile times in the past, but as I've mentioned it, they do tend to settle down, and it's just simply the nature of, financial markets. That's what they do. They go up, they go down. The key thing is to just take a longer term view of your planning and your finances, and just try and, like I said, ride out the turbulent times, if possible. But, if you do need anything, I'll certainly suggest that if you're worried or got any concerns with anything, then certainly speak to your financial advisor.
Most definitely. If you've enjoyed listening today, why not head over and join our Facebook group, The Money Compass?
And if you have any questions for myself, Lucas,
or me, Emma,
drop us a message in this group.